A question that comes up frequently, I think, for people when they're just learning how to practice Lectio is a real basic question of, am I doing this right? And I'm curious, when people come to you and they ask you that question, what is some guidance that you might give them to maybe assure them or maybe, to usher them along in the process so that they are able to practice Lectio free of this worry of whether or not they're doing it the right way?
Right. So I think there might be like two general approaches to this. The one would be in terms of, am I doing it right in terms of the selection of texts that I'm moving through? And there's multiple ways in which people talk about how to approach Lectio. Some, for example, would want to look at it thematically. So you can, for example, look at texts that deal with anxiety or depression or gratitude or love, right? And then you find texts, and there are books actually that publish thematic prompts for Lectio around that area. So you can, for example, approach Lectio thematically in that way by asking, what is something I'm looking to get from the text or from this prayer? What's something I need sort of encouragement around? Another approach suggests that we should really just begin with a particular book and move all the way through slowly over the course of weeks or months and just stick with the text. And both of these approaches have their pros and cons. So in terms of doing it right or getting it right, I would say the first thing is that somebody who's new to studying Scripture or praying with Scripture, they would want to seek some guidance as to where to start. As some people may know, the first several chapters, for example, of the book of Numbers is nothing more than a list of names that you can't pronounce. And so this isn't going to be very helpful. So starting somewhere simple, something more amenable to a prayerful context, like the opening of one of our Gospels or something like this, might be a better place in that regard. Or again, approaching thematically, what are texts that speak to something I'm struggling with? So I would just say, in terms of getting it right, especially for somebody new, be selective about where you start, which text you begin with. Beyond that, I don't really know that it's possible to get it wrong. And this is something I would want to, dispel any notions around that you really can do Lectio incorrectly. One of the things that we've been talking about is how these different sort of movements are not linear, but sort of interrelational and move back and forth in this ebb and flow. It's about learning how to both move forward in a particular direction through a process, starting, say, with reading or opening our hearts to the Spirit in prayer, and then trying to remain nimble enough to just trust what's coming up and to run with it, to go with it. And in that sense, the way in which you're in dialogue with the scriptural text, I think, is somewhat immune to doing it wrong, right? And the way that we learn to meditate is not by reading about it, not even by reading about books about Lectio, but by just doing it, just beginning to engage.
And so maybe trusting, and if I hear you correctly, trusting that the intention is there to practice. Is that right?
Right. And that trust is trusting that as I approach this, it's my heart that turns to Christ. In that moment, I've already begun. And trusting that presence of Christ, that abiding sense, remains with me and is holding and guiding me through this, that the Spirit is really present in this process.
That's right. And it's like the presence of God has not ever gone anywhere, right?
That's right. It's our own awareness of whether that presence is there or not, that we have maybe an experience of the presence of God. But of course, as we know from the tradition, that presence of Christ is ever abiding, So what Lectio, as many meditative practices, assists us with is opening to that awareness of that abiding presence.
Yeah. And as you said, the presence that's in the text already.
The presence that's in the text already, and the way in which the text points to the presence of Christ as well. And I think, one of the things that we find whenever we're teaching any form of meditation is this anxiety. Am I doing it right? Am I breathing right? Is my posture right? Am I holding my hands correctly? One of the best ways to overcome that is to begin these practices in a group. So if you were to start a small group in your parish and just get some people together who'd like to experiment with, say, Lectio in a shared context, where you're in the same room and moving through the same text together, what often comes up is how similar our responses and questions are. And that sort of reinforces this idea that, oh, I'm not actually doing anything wrong. What I'm experiencing is very common, is very normal, very natural.
That's right. That's right.